Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully, there's some people still joining. I can see there's a couple of people that have said hello in the chat. So, welcome and thanks for joining us today. I'm going to jump straight in. We have about half an hour, and hopefully, you can get as much value out of this as possible. So, my name is Miruna. I am the customer support and specialist here at Sitebulb, and I run these monthly training sessions where we cover a different topic each month. We've been running them for a while now. So if you feel like you need support in any area, so you have any suggestions for other topics that you'd like to see covered, we're always open to feedback. Okay, so today's session, we're going to cover auditing performance with Sitebulb. So specifically, I'm going to focus on Sitebulb's performance report. I'm going to briefly talk you through some considerations that you need to know about before you set up the report, the audit, how to set up your settings, and then we're going to look at the actual report data and some specifics within that as the performance budget and code coverage, which is one of the optional settings that you have within your performance report. So I'm going to jump into Sitebulb now, into the tool itself, and we can get started from there. So as you see here, I am in the browser, so I'm using Sitebulb Cloud for this demonstration. That is our cloud solution, but if you're using Sitebulb on desktop, you will have more or less the same settings. Obviously, if you're using Sitebulb Lite on desktop, you do need to take into account that you don't have access to certain technical features like performance. So this is specifically applicable to Sitebulb Pro and Sitebulb Cloud. Okay, so the performance report is something that you will see in your audit, assuming you have enabled the report within your audit settings. So I will talk through how to set up the performance audit, but first I wanted to talk you through some considerations by looking at this report. So the first thing that you need to know is that Sitebulb uses the Chrome crawler in order to audit your performance. When you enable the Chrome crawler and you enable your performance report, what Sitebulb is going to do is run through all your pages and first collect web vitals across a sample of your pages, which is determined in the settings. So I'll touch more on that in a second. And then it also runs the Lighthouse rule set across every single page it crawls. So what it's going to do there is find opportunities and diagnostics, just like Lighthouse would, for all of the pages that it is crawling. That means that you have access to all of this data within Sitebulb itself without having to do those checks page by page in other tools like Lighthouse. And then you also have a couple of points of optional data. So one of them is technologies, whether or not you want Sitebulb to gather those as it crawls, that is enabled by default. The other is code coverage, which is not enabled by default, but it's an optional feature that you can turn on when you turn on your performance report. And what that will do is enable this report here, the code coverage report. And again, I will touch on that in a second and what you can find in this report. And then you've also got performance budgets. So this is something that gets run by default. And again, I will talk you through what this means when we come to the audit data. The caveats that you need to know when it comes to auditing performance are, first and foremost, is that enabling the performance report means a more resource-intensive audit. So it's one of the most resource-intensive reports that you can enable alongside accessibility and spelling. So you do have to take that into account because it will impact the speed of your crawl. So enabling performance means that each page is going to take slightly longer to be processed because of all of the extra checks Sitebulb has to do. And that means that your crawl will take longer to run. It will also impact the size of your crawl because when Sitebulb crawls in order to audit performance, it needs to download and save all of the resources that find in every page, on every page. So when you look at the overview of your crawl, you will notice that Sitebulb will have crawled your HTML internal pages, and for each of those pages, it will have gathered a bunch of resources. Now, depending on how your site is set up, you could have anywhere from, one or two to like tens of resources for each of your pages. So that might really bloat your crawl. So in this instance, you can see that we've crawled 718 internal pages, and Sitebulb has gathered 1.7, so 1,700 resources This could be much larger for different sites. So you need to take that into account. Okay, so how do we take these considerations into account when setting up our crawl? I'm going to set up a new project and give you some of that information. So let's just select sitebulb.com as an example, the simplest way to do it. First thing you need to do here when creating a new project is think about the purpose of your audit or your crawl. Generally, we recommend that you do performance as a separate project, not just a separate audit, a separate project. So rather than getting this audit started and enabling every single report and trying to get all of the data within one audit, I would generally recommend that you think about the purpose of each one of your projects and separate your website into different areas. So the reason we recommend that is because, like I said, performance is a very resource intensive audit, but also generally, in order to diagnose performance problems, you don't really need to crawl every single URL on your site. Now, if you're dealing with very small sites, crawling every single URL will probably be just fine. But once you get into the tens and hundreds of thousands of URLs and maybe even millions, depending on how large the websites you are dealing with are, enabling performance is just going to add anywhere between like 3 to 5 seconds to each one of your web URLs to audit. So that is take into account things like web vitals and all the other checks it does. So it will slow down your crawl. And you might not actually need all of that information. So you might want to think, if you're crawling a particularly large website, about doing your SEO audits in one project and then having a separate project for performance where you're perhaps doing a sample crawl, or you're even crawling a URL list of your key pages. So let's see how we would do that. I would first select the Chrome crawler because, like I said, we need it for performance. And then once you go into your audit settings, you can consider your crawl sources. So do I want to crawl the whole website? I could do that if I wanted to and just leave it as it is by default. I could also choose to only crawl the URLs included in my sitemaps. Generally, you will have your most important pages in your sitemaps, the pages that you want Google to index. So that might be a good way to go about it. Alternatively, you could choose to create a URL list of your core or key pages, a good sample of pages that represents the different templates and areas of your site, and then use that as your crawl source. So that's just some things you can do. If you do wish to crawl your website, you also have the option to use something like internal or inclusions or exclusions in order to limit your crawl to specific areas of the site, and again, kind of bring down the scope of the crawl to the areas that matter the most for you and the areas that you want to analyze. Okay, so in terms of actually enabling the performance report, all you need to do is come here and enable the performance and mobile friendly report. Now you will see that by default, the page resources report will also be enabled because, like I said, Sitebulb needs to save those pages in order to accurately audit performance. It needs to save all your page resources. Okay, so you've enabled the performance report. There are a few extra settings here that you can work with. So the first thing, like I mentioned, is the code coverage report. Now, whether or not you want to enable this will obviously depend on whether you want to analyze code coverage. So when you enable the code coverage report, Sitebulb will check the code for every page and every file found during the crawl, and it will create a report that contains information about every CSS and JavaScript file found on your website, and it will show you a margin of unused code. So for each of your every file that it has found where there is some unused code, that will be reported, so you can analyze it and decide whether anything needs to be done about that. Scrolling down, you've got your Web Vital sampling. Now, as a rule of thumb, we do not recommend increasing this. By default, Sitebulb samples 10% of your pages for core web vitals. And the way it does it is that it will check one page, skip the next 9, check another page. So as you crawl, it gives you a really good sample of the depth and breadth of your website. And all you're trying to do really is get an idea of patterns of performance, because realistically, pages with the same template on your website are likely to have very similar performance issues. So by getting a sample of those pages, you can already get an idea of where the performance issues are and address them without slowing down your audit more than necessary and making it less efficient than it could be. You need to take into account that for every page that Sitebulb performs Web Vitals sampling on, it will add 3 seconds of processing per URL. So that's kind of like what I was referring to earlier. So every page that Sitebulb checks Web Vitals on, it will add about 3 seconds of processing per URL. And that's kind of an average, because Sitebulb needs to wait for the page to become fully interactive before it can do this analysis and this check on it. If you go and try and run a check on Google's Web Vitals tools, you will see that it sometimes can take up to 10 seconds for a page to return those results. And it's kind of the same principle, right? Like you need to wait for that page to fully load, to fully become active and interactive before it can be properly reviewed. So, like I say, you could increase this, but we do not recommend it. The only exception might be where you've pare down the pages that you're analyzing to like a very, very compact list. So say you've got a list of 100 key pages from your website, you're using that as a URL list, as a crawl source. And in that case, you might want to check Web Vitals for all of those pages. But if you're just doing a crawl, a discovery crawl, do leave this as it is for on that 10% sampling. Okay, the next box here that you've got is the performance budget configuration. So just remember this is here. It will become relevant once I talk about the performance budget section. So let's jump into the performance report and look at the data. Okay, so this is what you will see once audit Sitebulb has completed the audit and it has completed the performance checks. I've got a couple of examples here. Neither of these websites are particularly bad. So obviously this might look different if you're dealing with a more problematic website. But the structure of the report will always be the same. So when you land on it, you land on the overview page. At the very top of that page, you've got your performance score. So that is this number here. Now, for most Sitebulb reports, that number is calculated based on the hints that have been triggered. But in the performance report, it's the one exception where it's different. So the way this performance score is calculated is independent of hints and is based on each URL sampled for Web Vitals, based on the Lighthouse scoring calculator, which translates Web Vitals data into like a weighted score. And Sitebulb is creating an average of all the URLs sampled here to give you a score on performance. So like I said, Sitebulb is collating that data for you and giving you an idea of those patterns and the general state of the performance of your website. As you scroll lower down, the first thing that you see up here is the URL performance score. So again, out of those 10% URLs that have been sampled for Web Vitals, they have been analyzed. All of those Web Vitals scores have been taken into account to provide a performance score for each URL. And then they have been put into 3 buckets, which will be good, needs improvement, or poor. In this case, we only have good and needs improvement URLs. So if you click on either of these buckets and either of these metrics, you will jump into a URL list of all of those pages that have a score that needs improvement. And you can see the performance score here. And then you can also scroll to see the actual Web Vitals metrics for each of those URLs. The next kind of step, next layer that you can do to further analyze this data is obviously use the advanced filters and the add and remove columns like you would in any other URL list to kind of pare down that data and find the the pages that you need to pay attention to first. And you can also do like a page-by-page analysis by using the performance data button, which will take you into this URL details view. And you can actually see the specific web vitals for the page and a bunch of other information. So this is the opportunities and diagnostics, which I mentioned before, and I will come back to. Okay. The next thing you've got on your performance report overview, it's the actual web vitals. So for each metric, Sitebulb follows or categorizes the pages within the set thresholds for good, needs improvement, and poor. Each URL falls into one of these 3 buckets, and then they are aggregated and presented in this pie chart. So there's 6 of them, and they allow you to quickly identify pages, say, by web vital metrics. So in this case, I can look at CLS and or any of the other metrics, and then essentially like jump straight into a list of the pages that have been categorized as having a poor score within that metric. So again, it's just a quick way of jumping into very specific points of data straight from the report overview without having to do that kind of like analysis and filtering yourselves. Okay, what should we talk about next? So yes, so in terms of the hints on the performance report, again, like every report, the performance report has a series of hints that Sitebulb is presenting for you. While the hints on many of the other reports are kind of like Sitebulb's own, the hints in the performance report are actionable suggestions to improve web vitals, which are presented to you in the form of the opportunities and diagnostics that Lighthouse provides. So opportunities present optimization opportunities that can help you speed up your site and improve performance. And then diagnostics flag specific problems that need to be addressed on your website. So as you scroll down, you will see that as well as being categorized by priority from critical to low, they're also categorized as opportunity or diagnostic. Again, you can use the view URL buttons to jump straight into a list of the affected pages for each of these hints. And you will see that in some cases, you have hints where you have both a view URLs and a view resources button. So that will be specifically hints where they relate to page resources. Sitebulb will provide you those 2 lists of both the affected URLs and the page resources that are creating that issue. So in this case, I can click on view URLs and view the affected pages. Or if I can just go back to performance, I can click view resources and see specifically the resources that do not have an efficient cache policy. Now, I mentioned the URL view again. So like I said, if you click on performance data, you can see the specific data for each of these URLs, and you can see the opportunities and diagnostics that have been flagged for each of those pages. So in this case, there might be some unused CSS and unused JavaScript, and that is flagged here. You can see specifically which JavaScript and which CSS files are being unused. You have a few other points of data like the wasted percentage, wasted bytes, and you also have the references to this file. So if you wanted to, you could jump into a list of all of the pages that reference that specific file. Yeah, so that's kind of different ways in which you can analyze the data from a very broad to a very individual URL specific level. Okay, let's go back here. The last thing before I move on to performance budgets and code coverage that I want to mention is HTML templates. So let's jump into a Sitebulb report. HTML templates, again, you've got a general report at the top of the left-hand menu here, and you will see a tab for HTML templates in most of your Sitebulb reports. But it's essentially a way for Sitebulb, as it crawls, it will gather all of your pages as it recognizes the template under, those templates. It will categorize them. You have the option to name your templates, which you can see we have done for some of our key page templates in this report. And then again, what we have here is by template, every URL that Sitebulb has sampled for Web Vitals within the features and products page template, it has collated that data, and I can very quickly identify if there are any specific areas of my site that are giving us problems. So in this case, our web developers are doing a great job, so there's not that many pages with poor Web Vitals, but if there were, let's see if this is a better example. You can very quickly see here if there's a specific template that has a poor score in one of these metrics and start prioritizing there. By naming your templates too, you can have a better idea of what kind of pages each of these templates reference. So say if my guides or my blog pages had poor performance, perhaps I would put that as priority over improving the performance of something like my blog category pages, which I know are not indexable anyway. And like I said, this data about HTML templates is available to you in many other reports. So it's really easy to kind of like cross-check and identify what's going on here, like are most of the pages in this template indexable? And therefore, do I care about them having poor performance, or is it a priority to fix their performance? Okay, I think we can move on to code coverage now. We've got 8 minutes left, so that should be enough time. Okay, so the code coverage is a much more pared down report because we're specifically focusing here on CSS and JavaScript files. So you will see that you have two tabs at the top. One is CSS coverage, one is JavaScript coverage. Sitebulb here has essentially picked up any file here where there is some code wastage, like a margin of code wastage that could go from anywhere like 1% to something like 95, like you can see here. You've got three metrics at the very top here in terms of coverage. You've got total, which is the size of the file in bytes, unused, which is the amount of unused code within the file, and then wasted, which is the unused code within the file as a percentage of the total file size. You've also got the incoming references columns, which shows you the total URLs, which is the number of pages that the script was found on, and then the wasted URLs, which is the number of HTML pages that the script was found on, and that doesn't use all of the script. So that would represent like 100% wastage. So again, this is a report that can be really useful if you know what you're looking for. But you do need to have some technical understanding and possibly support from your dev team when looking at this report. Just because Sitebulb is identifying a file as being wasted or having some sort of wastage, it does not mean that you should go ahead and remove that piece of code from that file. And the reason for that is because you need to remember that Sitebulb can do things like interact with your page, click on things, open up pop-ups, something that a user would do. So there might be code within your website that is designed to do that, is designed to interact, to pop up, to open things as users click through the page, which bots and crawlers cannot do. For a more visual representation, you've got this here, which is a side-by-side view of the code and the bits of code specifically that have been identified as being unused or wasted on the page, on the file. Okay, so that is the code coverage report. And like every report, it's got your export buttons at the top here, which allow you to kind of do some further analysis of that data outside of the tool. Finally, I wanted to cover performance budget. So let's just go back to our performance report and look at the performance budget tab. Again, performance budget, super useful, but very specific set of data. So what the performance budgets do is give you a collection of page level thresholds for various page resources and website metrics. So things like documents, fonts, images, scripts. Images in particular is a useful one, something that many SEOs will be looking for, the size of your images and how that impacts performance, but obviously other types of page resources do the same. Now, it's a quantity-based performance budget for page resources, so it might not be something that you focus on every audit, but you can analyze this from here. So what is happening here, if we go back to the Sitebulb audit settings, is that there is a default file size that has been set for each of these types of files, right? So maximum size for scripts, for style sheets, for images, and then Sitebulb is analyzing all of those page resources that it's finding on your website against that threshold and telling you whether it's passed or failed. So, out of a maximum size of 1,000 kilobytes, how many images have passed and how many images have gone over that threshold and therefore have failed. And you can jump into the list of images that have failed or have gone over that threshold from here, and obviously see important metrics like the image size, as well as referencing URLs. So how many pages on your site are referencing that image. If you are doing a performance budget report, what you might want to do is, when you're setting up your performance report, come in here and set your own thresholds. And in order to set those performance budgets, you will want to be in conversation again with your development team and really understand what your goals are and what is it that you're trying to do. So that is, if that is something that you're curious about, we do have a support document on how to set those performance budgets and how to choose them. So that takes us to the end of our session. And since I'm mentioning our support documents, I just wanted to show you where to find them. So if you come into the Help and Support button and you navigate to Help, this will allow you to essentially browse the Help Center within the tool. So you can look for performance and jump into something like the performance report, which is a help document that talks through all of the points of data that we just talked about and links to different other resources that might be useful. This session has been recorded, so what I'm going to do once we're done is upload it to our website and then send everyone an email. And I will also link to a number of other resources that might be useful if you want to understand more about performance. The last thing I want to say before everyone goes is that we are looking for feedback on these sessions now that they've been running for a while. So there will be a link in your email with the recording. So if you can provide some feedback, that would be really, really useful to help us keep improving. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, that will be welcome too. So yeah, have a good rest of your day or your evening, depending on where you are. And I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.